as they're passing, I'll let you know I've got something new for you for the month of December. If you read the bulletin, I kind of gave it away in the bulletin. But for the next 4 weeks of December, I am going to do just a little short 4-part series about looking forward to the new year. It probably will extend into the new year, into just 1 week to start the new year off, as well with a kickoff lesson for the year. So we'll take a break and we'll pick up in Matthew 26, probably in the second Sunday in January. So what we're going to do now is every time there's a new year approaching, I know it's not just me. It's a lot of people feel the same way. I have a new kind of burst of energy and a new kind of burst of hope and of just for the future in general. I think, well, hey, a new year's coming. You know, maybe this will be the year that I lose the 30 pounds. I'm not counting on that. But I have higher hopes. I have great spiritual hopes for the church and for myself and for you all and for the year 2022. And I want to look forward to it. I don't want to look forward and look at the state of things in the world and say, well, I don't feel a whole lot of hope, because I want my hope not to be in what I see around me in the world. I want my hope to be in what the Lord is capable of accomplishing. So that's what the lessons for these next lessons we're going to be looking at are, and these are going to be some of my favorite, some of my most encouraging things that encourage me the very most. I hope they're going to be very encouraging to you as well. And what we're looking at this morning, of course, as the screen indicates, part 1 of this little series is the leadership of Jonathan. The leadership of Jonathan. Jonathan, of course, being probably most famous for 2 reasons: for being the crown prince of Israel, the son of Israel's first king, King Saul. Probably better known for being the best friend of David. Led a very interesting life. A life under a father who was not a good king, who really was not a good person in a worldly sense or a spiritual sense. But that did not inhibit Jonathan from being a pretty wonderful person all around. So let's look and see what we can learn from him this morning. To kind of lay the stage for you this morning, in the history of Israel, they were a people that did not have a leader. And you say, well, yeah, Wes, they did have a leader. They had King Saul. No, the people had a king. They did not have a leader. And those 2 things are not the same thing. You know, we may have in different areas of our government, we may have people that are in positions of authority, but that does not make them leaders. No, leadership is something different. So let's look and lay the background this morning as we get into this. 1 Samuel 13, 2 through 7 helps us with that. It says, now Saul chose for himself 3,000 men of Israel, of which 2,000 were with Saul in Michmash and in the hill country of Bethel, while 1,000 were with Jonathan at Gibeah of Benjamin. But he sent away the rest of the people, each to his tent. Jonathan smote the garrison of the Philistines that was in Geba, and the Philistines heard of it. Then Saul blew the trumpet throughout the land, saying, let the Hebrews hear. All Israel heard the news that Saul had smitten the garrison of the Philistines, and also that Israel had become odious to the Philistines. The people were then summoned to Saul at Gilgal. Now, what's interesting about this 4th verse, you may have noticed right off at the beginning of verse 4, it says, all Israel heard the news that Saul had smitten the garrison of the Philistines. Is that true? No. Who had smitten the garrison of the Philistines? Jonathan. Jonathan attacked the Philistines. Jonathan had the victory. Jonathan received none of the credit. Who received the credit? Saul. Saul received the credit. Verse 5. Now the Philistines assembled to fight with Israel, 30,000 chariots, 6,000 horsemen, and people like the sand which is on the seashore in abundance. And they came up and camped in Michmash, east of Beth-aven. So Jonathan attacks. He has a great victory. Saul takes credit for it. And here come the Philistines. They pour out in their greatest assembly of an armed force to crush Israel in retaliation. And what happens? Verse 6, when the men of Israel saw that they were in a strait. Now that word strait means trouble, like dire straits. Not the band, but actual trouble. When they saw that they were in trouble, for the people were hard pressed, then the people hid themselves in caves, in thickets, in cliffs, in cellars, and in pits. Where's their leader? Why did Saul allow this to happen? Why couldn't he rally the people to, why couldn't he say to the people, hey, don't run and hide. You know, the Lord can handle these Philistines. Was because that's not the kind of person that Saul was. He was a king. He was not a leader. Also, some of the Hebrews crossed the Jordan into the land of Gad and Gilead. But as for Saul, he was still in Gilgal, and all the people followed him trembling. The word trembling can also be translated terrified. Scared to death. Why were they scared to death? Because Saul was scared to death. And how could the people have any courage when their leader was a coward? Now, Saul's cowardice followed him all of his life. Through all of his life in his kingship, you read through 1 Samuel and 2 Samuel, Saul was insecure. He was a coward. He had no confidence, and he didn't follow the Lord. You know, all those things combined made for a terrible king and a terrible leader for Israel. But this is what happens in the history of Israel. When everything falls apart, the Lord always has his people. In the midst of the hard times, in the midst of leaderless nations, leaders arise. And they don't arise on their own accord. They're brought up by the Lord. John C. Maxwell, he's known for being for all of his books on leadership and speaking at leadership conferences and things of that nature. But what you might not know about John Maxwell is that he is also a preacher. And here's one of his quotes, which is very appropriate. A leader is one who knows the way, goes the way, and shows the way. All leadership characteristics, none of which were exhibited by Saul, all of which were exhibited by his son, Jonathan. Okay, so we're getting into our story for today. 1 Samuel 14, 1 through 23. I read it previously. Let's go through it. Now the day came that Jonathan, the son of Saul, said to the young man who was carrying his armor, "Come and let us cross over to the Philistines' garrison that is on the other side." But he did not tell his father. Which is interesting, right? So Saul puts together this plan. It's a two-man plan. Only one man armed, though. The other person very much relying on Jonathan. Armor bearers relied on the person whose armor they were carrying to keep them alive, to keep them in a job. So Jonathan says to his armor bearer, the guy who carried his armor and his sword and his shield, and says, "Hey, how about just the two of us go attack that group of Philistines that we see over there?" Sounds like a good idea, huh? I like the way that he thinks. But what's most interesting about this, too, he didn't tell his father. Now, I think back, when I didn't tell my dad things, when you didn't tell your dad things, why didn't you tell him? Why wouldn't you? Well, I didn't tell my dad things when I knew that he would say no, right? I kind of lived my whole life by that saying it's easier to ask forgiveness than it is permission. So if I knew Dad was going to say no and forbid it from happening, I typically would just go ahead and do it. Well, that's, I think, is what Jonathan is doing here. Jonathan, though he is fiercely loyal to his father in his life, he never does anything to betray his father. Now, he does do some things to protect David when his father was in the wrong, but he sticks to his father his entire life, even though his father was no good. He even dies by his father's side in battle when he could have been elsewhere, when he could have been with David. He was loyal to the end, even though his father was not right. He was a good son, even though his father was not a good father. So he didn't tell his dad. And here he goes. Cynthia Ocelli has this quote. When people undermine your dreams, predict your doom, or criticize you, remember, they're telling you their story, not yours. Have you ever had some kind of an audacious plan? Have you ever had some kind of optimism in your life where you said, we can do it, we can do it, and then someone in the church comes along, one of your very brothers and sisters in Christ, and goes, oh, that'll never work. It can't happen. I mean, don't you know? I mean, we tried that before. It didn't work. That you can't be successful doing that. And someone comes and just rains on your parade. You know? I think we've all had that at one time or another. But listen to Miss Ocelli's quote there. When people say that to you, you have to let that go. Because what they're relaying to you is their own doubts, their own lack of faith, and their own experience that has not been successful. That doesn't mean the same is going to be true of you. Another quote by someone that you recognize here. Do not give what is holy to dogs, and do not throw your pearls before swine, or they will trample them under their feet and tear you to pieces. If you have some great idea for the church, if you have some great thought, if you want to step out in faith and say, you know, we can do it. You know, we can do it right here in Wellington. You know, it's going to happen. We can do it. We can make it happen. Don't say that to people who are going to poo-poo your idea immediately and say, you know, I shouldn't have said that, I guess. Sorry. Don't say that to people who are going to discourage you and say, we've tried that. We tried that once. It didn't work. It's not going to work. You can't do it. It's not possible. You know, don't listen to the naysayers. That's why Jonathan didn't tell his dad. That's why Jonathan didn't cast his, you know, that's why he didn't tell any of the other people in Israel, because what were they doing? They were trembling. They were terrified. But here in the midst of all of Israel, with all of the Israelites terrified, who wasn't terrified? Jonathan. Jonathan looked around at all those terrified people and said, we have the Lord. Why are you trembling? But he didn't say it to him. He knew what they would say to him. He said it to the one person that he trusted and that trusted him with his life. I have two questions I'm going to answer this morning. The first of which is, why did Jonathan take action? Why did Jonathan do what he did? So let's look at that first. Verse 2, Saul was of 2 Samuel 14, or 1 Samuel 14 rather. Saul was staying in the outskirts of Gibeah under the pomegranate tree, hiding under a big tree, which is in Migron. And the people who were with him were about 600 men. And now, note, there's something very deliberate in the language here that Samuel is telling us about the company that Saul was keeping. Who's with Saul? So he has his 600-person bodyguard. And then he has Ahijah, the son of Ahitub, Ichabod's brother. What does Ichabod mean? There's no reason to mention Ichabod, that he's Ichabod's brother at this point, other than to let us know that the name Ichabod means gloryless, or the glory has departed. The glory of the Lord is not here. So he's hanging out with a guy whose uncle has a name of the glory of the Lord is gone. And then also the son of Phinehas, the son of Eli. And remember, those two worthless sons of Eli, those priests after him who took bribes, distorted justice, and ate of the best part of the offering of the Lord instead of offering it to him. So that's another one of the guys. That's the priest that he has with him. And it also mentions the priest of the Lord at Shiloh was wearing an ephod. Now, why did the priest wear the ephod? And what did that priest do? Well, within the ephod was that Urim and that Thummim, or Urim and Thummim, and those were those two stones by which the priests used in order to ask God, what do we do next? Or here's our plan, Lord. And somehow they used those stones in order to determine what was the next plan, what was the next part of God's plan. So, but even though he's wearing the ephod, there's no one seeking guidance from the Lord. They're just hiding out. They're not trying to figure out what the Lord wants them to do. They think that they know what's best. Saul thinks he knows what's best. And the thing to do, the thing that makes most sense to do in the face of such a great enemy is to run and hide. That's Saul's mindset. And the people did not know that Jonathan had gone. He snuck away with his armor bearer. Between the passes by which Jonathan sought to cross over to the Philistines' garrison, there was a sharp crag on the one side and a sharp crag on the other side. The name of the one was Bozez. Now, the word Bozez literally is translated as shiny, okay, or slick. Shiny, like something that's shiny when it is slick, like a slick-looking rock. And on the other side, so you have a cliff here and you have a cliff here, and on the other side, the other cliff face was called Senna. Now that word literally means thorny or sharp. So you've got this slick rock over on this one side, you've got this thorny rock over on the other side. The one crag rose on the north opposite Michmash, the other on the south opposite Geba. So this is a picture of that exact area that they were in, don't know exactly where, but we know that the Philistines had the high ground, and Jonathan was somewhere down in this valley. And he saw a pass through the valley where he could climb up and get access to the heights. Now we know the pass it wasn't red like this, but it was something like this. It was a very small passageway that he could work his way through, he and his armor bearer, and climb up to the top. We know that it's small like that because when the battle begins, it says the battle took place within half of a furrow. And farmers here know how big a furrow is. May have been a little bit different in size in Israel's times, but basically a furrow is not a very wide stretch of land. And this is half of a furrow that runs between the cliffs. And that's where he's going to make his way up. Jonathan said to the young man who was carrying his armor, "Come and let us cross over to the garrison of these uncircumcised." And here's the quote, and this is where you want to make the note or underline it in your Bible or commit this to your heart for the rest of your life. One of the most important verses in your Bible right here. Perhaps the Lord will work for us. Now, he doesn't know what the Lord's going to do, not 100%, but he knows what the Lord has done in the past. And he knows the Lord. And he knows what the Lord has done in his life to this point. The Lord has already given him victory. Look what he says. Perhaps the Lord will work for us, for the Lord is not restrained to save by many or by few. What is he saying? This is what he's saying. God's leaders ignore odds. God's leaders do not look at the enemy and say, "Boy, that's a tough enemy." No, God's leaders look at the enemy and says, "Well, that looks like a whole bunch of people down there, but they're not as big as the Lord." That's what God's leaders say. You know, man, look, they think that they can outnumber God. What a joke. How foolish are those people? They think that they can win by their size of their numbers. They must not have heard the things that we've heard about the Lord. They must not know who he is. The second question I'm going to answer, the first question I'll answer, why did Jonathan take action? He took action because no one else was going to take action. And he looked around at a world of people and said, no one's doing anything. I don't care anymore if no one's going to do anything with me. Even if I'm the only one that goes, I'm going. Church, that is the heart that I want to have. That's the heart that I want every one of us to have. Approaching this new year, I want us to look and say, don't look at whatever you look at in the world that causes you discouragement. Look at the Lord and be encouraged that He can do anything, anywhere, anytime. He can make miracles happen, can and does and will, even right here in our midst, even right here. Why was Jonathan brave? Well, he had reason to be brave. It wasn't a blind faith that Jonathan had. Leviticus 26:7-9, he would have known these words. But you will chase your enemies, and they will fall before you, by the sword. 5 of you will chase 100, and 100 of you will chase 10,000. And your enemies will fall before you by the sword. So I will turn toward you and make you fruitful and multiply you. And I will confirm my covenant with you. He knew the promises of the Lord. He knew how the Lord did His business. He did not need great numbers of people to win great victories. He knew the words from Joshua that were spoken to Joshua when he took over leadership from Moses. No man will be able to stand before you all the days of your life. The Lord to Joshua. Just as I have been with Moses, I will be with you. I will not fail you or forsake you. Now, those words were spoken directly to Jonathan, but those words could be spoken to any follower of the Lord. Any follower of the Lord. Be strong and courageous, for you shall give this people possession of the land which I swore to their fathers to give them. He knew there was a promise associated with the land that they were fighting for possession of too. A promise that the Lord said, you fight for me, you're going to win. You're guaranteed victory if you go into it knowing that I've won the battle. In Judges 3:31, he may have been encouraged by someone like Shamgar, which we know a little bit about. After him came Shamgar, the son of Anath, who struck down 600 Philistines with an ox goad, and he also saved Israel. He may have been encouraged by the one man who killed 600 Philistines with a sharp stick. What is an ox goad? It's a sharp stick. It's what you goad the rear end of an ox with to make him go. It's a stick that you poke an ox with. And Shamgar killed 600 Philistines with that sharp stick. Why? Because he was the most superior fighter in the world? No, because the Lord blessed him. The Lord fought the battle for him. The Lord was with him. And such things are possible with the Lord. God's leaders trust God. Bottom line, God's leaders don't trust in themselves. They don't trust in superior numbers. They don't trust in superior technology or in fancy methodology or anything like that. God's leaders trust in God and God's word. Verse 7, his armor bearer said to him, do all that is in your heart. Turn yourself, and here I am with you according to your desire. Now, this lesson just isn't about the leadership of Jonathan. It is also about the leadership of the armor bearer. This is a person who says, okay, Jonathan, here's your sword. Here's your shield. I'll carry your knife. And I'll stick as close to behind you as I possibly can. If Jonathan goes down, this guy's done. I mean, all of his hope is in the one who wears the armor. But that's not true. Because, I mean, I don't think this guy's a fool. I think this guy is inspired. He doesn't look at Jonathan and say, I don't believe you. He looks at Jonathan and he sees the glow in his eye and he goes, you know what? I believe you're right. I think the Lord is going to win this battle. God's leaders inspire. They inspire others. But also, let me flip that coin. Not only do God's leaders inspire others, but God's leaders need encouragement. What if his armor bearer would have said, oh, let's talk about this. I I don't think this is a good idea. As a matter of fact, I mean, statistically speaking, this is the worst idea you've ever had, Jonathan. Or, could you at least get me a sword and a shield before we try to go up and do this, so at least I have a fighting chance? No, he doesn't say that at all. He encourages him. So Jonathan comes to the right person and says, I think we can do it. And he goes, yeah, let's do it. Let's go. Let's climb that cliff. That's right. Then Jonathan said, behold, we will cross over to the men and reveal ourselves to them. Now the plan has just gone absolutely haywire crazy. The one thing they had in their favor was the element of surprise, right? Let's eliminate the element of surprise. Let's pour water on the altar and see if the Lord will burn it up with the water on it. That's what he's saying. Let's go show ourselves to him and say, hey, let's go pick a fight. Let's not tell them that. Let's not sneak up on them and ambush their camp. Let's go show ourselves to them. Verse 9, if they say to us, wait until we come to you, then we will stand in our place and not go up to them. We're going to take that. If they say that to us, we're going to take that as a sign from God that we're not supposed to do it. Now, church, let me tell you this. Don't go looking for signs from God. Okay? Jonathan lived in a different time. He had different promises specifically made to him that if he had the faith to live them out, they would be fulfilled. Now, we have some things like that too, but don't go testing God saying, well, you know what, when I wake up tomorrow, if the first thing that someone says to me is good morning, then I'll know whatever. And if the first thing they say to me is hey, then I'll think, okay, don't do it. Don't go looking for signs from God. Jesus said that the unrighteous look for signs. Okay? So let's keep it all in context here. But this is what he says. If they say this, we'll take that as our sign from God that we're not supposed to fight. And we'll go away and regroup and think of something else. But, verse 10, if they say, come up to us, then we will go up, for the Lord has given them into our hands, and this shall be the sign to us. Now, here's the real test of faith. The test of faith comes when they step out from behind that ledge. And they say, when both of them revealed themselves to the garrison of the Philistines said, behold, Hebrews are coming out of the holes where they have hidden themselves. They're making fun of them. It's true, though. Israel is running hidden. Look, they're coming out of holes in the ground. So the men of the garrison held Jonathan and his armor-bearer and said, come up to us, and we will tell you something. You wouldn't believe the view from up here. You guys come check it out. Or come up here. We'll tell you something real neat. Just get up here. Get up here. This is where faith had to come in. Okay? Because it's one thing to have this game plan, but once Jonathan had this game plan in place, in order to live out his faith, he had to do what he had committed to do based on what their reaction was. And he doesn't say, well, let's rethink this thing. They're very confident. The Philistines are. They're not afraid. They're saying, come on up here, little guy. I want to show you something. Let me tell you something. But Jonathan said to his armor-bearer, come up after me, for the Lord has given them into the hands of Israel. We don't have anything to worry about. The Lord's going to take care of business today. Then Jonathan climbed up on his hands and feet with the armor-bearer behind him, up through that narrow passage, climbing up those slick, sharp rocks, and they fell before Jonathan. What does that mean? That means Jonathan went to work with that shield and his sword and started cutting down those Philistines that stood before him. And his armor-bearer put some to death after him. I don't know if this guy was hitting them with rocks or if he had a little knife or how he was killing people, but he joins in the slaughter too, and he's not even armed that we know of. That first slaughter with Jonathan and his armor-bearer made was about 20 men within about half a furrow. That's where that narrowness comes from. Within about half a furrow in an acre of land. See, they were coming at him. They couldn't come at him all at once. They could only come at him one at a time. So he just killed one, stepped over him, killed another, stepped over him, and stretched out over about an acre of land and about half a furrow Jonathan and his armor bearer took down the Philistines. And there was a trembling in the camp, in the field, and among all the people. In other words, the Philistines were terrified. Even the garrison and the raiders trembled, and the earth quaked. This is a literal earthquake, a literal trembling of the earth, so that it became a great trembling. So Jonathan is faithful to what the Lord, to what he knows, how he knows the Lord takes action. So Jonathan, now notice this, Jonathan didn't walk up and say, okay, he says, you guys are in for it. The Lord is going to take care of you. No, Jonathan still actually had to fight them. He still had to actually do something. We can't just sit back and say, you know what, I've got great faith. The Lord's going to do things here in Wellington. So anytime now, the Lord's going to do it. He's going to do it. No, we still are called upon by the Lord to take action and do something, to take that step of faith and do it. And then, once they took action, the Lord took action. The Lord sent an earthquake, and he caused a terror and a confusion to fall among all the Philistines. Now, Saul's got a watchman up on a high place, watching that great big crowd of Philistines, making sure that they don't advance to look for them. They're just watching their camp. His watchmen in Gibeah of Benjamin looked, and behold, the multitude melted away, and they went here and there. Saul said to the people who were with him, "Number now, and see who has gone from us." And when they had numbered, behold, Jonathan and his armor bearer were not there. Now, you've probably read over this before in your life and not realized what you were reading right here. What you're reading right here is stupidity, okay? So what do you do when you have a great enemy amassed before you and you see a whole bunch of confusion and terror break out amongst your enemy? What is the very best thing for you to do in that moment? Attack. But what does Saul do? Count the people. See who attacked them. Let me make sure, because I want to find out who's getting credit for this. Because it's not going to, if someone gets credit, it's going to be me, not them. So find out who it is. A foolish order. False leaders care about the wrong things. False leaders care about the wrong things. You have to watch out for this, because this can get tricky, okay? Because doesn't seem like on the surface of it a foolish thing to do, but it is. It's a terribly foolish thing to do. Then Saul said to Ahijah, let's continue in the foolishness, "Bring the ark of God here." So why are they calling for the ark of the covenant now? Why wasn't this the first thing that they did? Didn't they know the stories of Moses and Joshua and the great victories that were won? God's people, the priests carrying in the Ark of the Covenant into battle and winning those great battles against unbelievable odds. No, it looks like we can win. Go get the ark. Bring the ark. For the ark of God was that time with the sons of Israel. They got it back from the Philistines. While Saul talked to the priest, the commotion in the camp of the Philistines continued and increased. So why is Saul talking to the priest now? And look what he says to him. Withdraw your hand. What is the priest doing now? Well, Saul says, look, there's something going on with the enemy. Quick, inquire of the Lord and find out what we need to do. You know what you need to do. It's time to attack. Look, the Lord has delivered them into your hands. There's all confusion in their camp. The time is to attack. No, go get the ark. Go get the ark. Oh, and you over there. Quick, ask the Lord what we should do next. False leaders try to look like leaders. They wait until someone else does the work. They wait until it looks like they can win. And then what this reminded me of, actually, when I studied it, this is to my shame, but when I was in middle school playing football, I would wait for one of our big linebackers. I was a little cornerback. I would wait for one of our big linebackers or our safety to tackle the guy with the ball, and then I would go jump on top of the pile. And then my number was on top, so the announcer up in the booth would say, look down there and say, oh, number 80 tackled by number 82, Wes LaFleur. I didn't make the tackle. I jumped on top of the pile, right? That's what Saul's doing. Saul's the guy who jumps on top of the pile. He wants the credit. He doesn't want to do the work. He wants the credit, but he has no faith in God. Verse 20, then Saul and all the people who were with him rallied and came to the battle. Oh, here they come. You know, they're the people that join in after it's done, after the hard work has been accomplished. Here I come for the credit. And behold, every man's sword was against his fellow, and there was a very great confusion. So here's what the Lord will do for you. Here's what the Lord will do to your enemies. You don't have to worry about how many of them there are, because if there's not soldiers to fight the enemies, the Lord will just have your enemies fight themselves. That's exactly what he did. He had caused some kind of a confusion where the Philistines didn't know what was going on, and they started attacking one another. So the enemy's fighting the enemy. They didn't even have anyone to fight. And God does that because God doesn't need false leaders. He doesn't need the people who come in at the end after the work has been done to take the credit. God says, no. I'm not even going to let you kill anybody in this battle. I'm not going to let you come in and be a part of the victory because you have nothing to do with it. I'm going to let the enemies, I'm going to make the enemy kill one another, and you're not going to have any part of it because I don't need you. Now the Hebrews who were with the Philistines previously, who went up with them all around in the camp, even they also turned to be with the Israelites who were with Saul and Jonathan. Now what does it mean by now the Hebrews who were with the Philistines previously? Well, it means that the Philistines had taken Hebrew slaves. Part of Israel were the servants of the Philistines. And when they saw that their masters, their new masters who had been taken through war or conquest, or maybe they just sold themselves into the service of the Philistines because they thought that they were going to be the stronger nation, they said, hey, I'm out of Israel. I'm going to go serve the Philistines. They saw that Israel was rising up. They said, hey, let's turn on our masters. So that's what they did. They turned against the Philistines. They had courage. They were given courage. Verse 22, when all the men of Israel who had hidden themselves in the hill country of Ephraim heard that the Philistines had fled, even they also pursued them closely in the battle. You know, even the cowards came out of their holes in the ground and said, hey, if we're going to win, let's go fight. If it looks like we've already won, let's join in. Verse 23, most important of all the verses here. So the Lord, not Jonathan. Jonathan's the hero of the story from a humanistic standpoint, but he's not the point of the story. He's not the hero of the story. And you know what? If you do something great from the Lord, you won't be the hero of the story either. That's not the point. The point is not me trying to get you and encourage you and spur you or me on to do something wonderful for the Lord so that your name will be great and so that people will say, oh man, that Wes, he really did something great for the Lord. No. If someone looks at you or looks at me and is impressed by you or me, we have failed. That's a failure. If people don't look at the things that we do and are impressed with Jesus, that's when we've succeeded. We give him the glory. We honor him by what we do. And when people say, oh man, you're doing great things for the Lord, we say, no, I'm just doing my part. The Lord is letting me join in with his work. I'm just doing the little bit that he's given me to do. The Lord is the one doing the work. The Lord delivered Israel that day, and the battle spread beyond Beth Aven. Benjamin Franklin had this quote that I love. He said, most people die at 25 and aren't buried until they're 75. That doesn't mean that they're kept somewhere for 50 years and then buried in the ground. It means that by 25, most people say, you know what, it's hopeless. I don't think the Lord's going to do anything. I don't think that I can accomplish anything. So they become complacent. They don't take any chances. They don't live by faith. They don't try anything. They don't do anything. They just exist. Church, let's not exist. Now, I'm preaching this as much to me as I am to you. I don't want us to be discouraged. I want us to be encouraged. I don't want us to be thinking about death. I want us to be thinking about life. Another one of my favorite quotes comes from the book that was made into the popular miniseries movie Lonesome Dove, from Augustus McCrae. It's not dying I'm talking about, it's living. That's what I'm talking about. Of course, he was talking about chasing a herd of buffalo, but I'm talking about stepping out in faith and doing things for the Lord. Truly living your life. Not just getting by, not just existing, but being courageous like Jonathan, having the leadership of Jonathan. Even if no one else around you does, you're going to be able to find somebody. I'll be that somebody for you. I'll be your armor bearer. I will join in with you. What do you want to do? What are you dreaming of? In 2022, the first of our lessons, I hope you're encouraged by it. I encourage you as I encourage myself, lead like Jonathan. Put your faith in the Lord and lead like Jonathan. If there are any here today who have not joined in with the Lord in His purposes and His ways, if you've not made that great confession of Jesus as Christ and as Savior, then today can be the day you do that. Today can be the day, as Dave talked about in his lesson this morning, that Peter preached on that day of Pentecost and over 3,000 were baptized. You can join in that number of that many people that put on the Lord, clothe themselves with the Lord Jesus Christ through baptism and follow Him, and encourage others to follow as you follow Him. If there's any that we can serve here today, please come forward as we stand and as we sing.